wireless networking. In this nugget, we take a look at wireless networking. One of the first things you need to understand is why you would even want wireless networking. So we'll look at some of the advantages, some of which are obvious, and then we'll take a look at some of the disadvantages as well. Some of these things you may not actually be prepared for or anticipate, so we'll look at those. One of the key disadvantages, of course, is going to be potential security problems. We'll also take a look at how to install wireless devices, such as the wireless network card that you'll install on your computer. And then we'll look at selecting an access point and actually making the connection. Then we'll take a look at the all-important topic here of securing your wireless access point. And primarily, we're going to be showing a Wi-Fi protected access methods, or WPA. Also, we'll take a look at location-aware printing. It's not really having anything to do with wireless networking, but it's not a big enough topic on its own, so I'm just kind of tacking it on to the end of this. Do you see this dog? I'll bet you think that this is a hapless, delightful little dog. Well, actually, it's not very little. It's a big golden retriever named a Tucson. And Tucson is total destruction on four paws. Now, this dog is one that we bought before we moved into our new home. We were always told to get a new dog before you move. That way he doesn't wreck your new house, which was good because he ripped up all the carpet in our old house one day while we were gone for just a few minutes. So we thought, okay, it'll be better when we go to the new house and we've got him a little trained better and things like this. So we got to the new house. Guess what he does? He digs up the entire backyard, and all of the irrigation, the sprinklers and everything had a huge mess in the backyard. That was 2 strikes against Tucson. That's the name of the dog, like I said. And then finally what happened one day was I had just bought a brand new laptop. Oh no. You know where this is going, don't you? It was the top of the line laptop at the time that Dell made. It was very expensive. And I brought it back to the house, and we didn't have wireless networking in my home at that time. And so I plugged in my Ethernet cable, and then the dog here, Tucson, so happy to see me, came charging into my office, got tangled up in the Ethernet cable, pulled the laptop off of the desk, and smashed it onto the ground. Oh boy, I don't know what I'm going to miss more, that laptop or this dog. Just kidding. Tucson's fine, although the laptop has long since died. But among other things, there are some advantages to wireless, besides not having your dog get tangled up in a wire and pulling your laptop off the desk. The main advantage is, well, obviously, it's wireless. This means that we don't have to worry about moving into an office space where we have to remodel to run wires. Now, you may still have a place for wired Ethernet. Most organizations do. But you may not have to remodel everything. You may not have to rip walls out and put cable runs in. This can be especially difficult in older buildings that may not have drop ceilings or mezzanines or other locations like that to run various wires and cables. Also, it's very useful for a temporary network. For example, trade shows and conferences and things like this. A lot of the conferences that I do, which is usually Tech Mentor, we go in there and we have wireless networking that kind of follows us around. The event coordinators that set up our conference, they have wireless access points. They just plug them in, turn them on, and they let everybody know how they can connect to them. So it's very useful for that sort of a situation. Certain building codes would prevent you from being able to put in cable runs, again, because you can't rip things out, for example, in historical locations. Also, mobility is a big issue with this. You can take your laptop in your office and use it there, and then you can take it down the hall to a colleague's room, to a colleague's office, or to a conference room or something like this. So it gives you a great deal of flexibility. And then also when you travel, obviously, coffee shops, hotels, restaurants, all those sorts of things, airports. And then it will help to mitigate the potential of trip hazards, especially, again, in temporary office space, where you're just setting up temporary networks. And I have seen this as well, where there will be a temporary hub or a switch of some kind, where there'll be 8 or 16 ports on it, and all different kinds of people are plugged into it, and there's cables everywhere. That gets to be a real mess. You generally try to put everybody in a circle so all the cables go to the center, but that's not always how it works, and it can be a trip hazard. Now, along with the advantages of wireless, you're also going to run into several disadvantages. One of those is sometimes spotty service. If you're in a single location like a coffee shop, and that's usually a small enough environment for a single access point to deliver service to the entire area. But sometimes you'll be in organizations where you'll have multiple access points throughout the building, and sometimes there's just these dead zones, just like cell phones have dead zones sometimes. And you just get to a certain conference room, they never seem to have good service there, and you may or may not be able to get a good signal. So sometimes that's an issue, and you've all probably run into that as well sometimes. Then there's also the issue of freeloaders. This is kind of weird. I mean, this is especially going to be an issue when it comes to things like densely populated areas, apartment complexes, and things like this. And this is where someone else will use your wireless access point to get free internet access. I mean, you're paying $40 a month, $50 a month for internet access, and your neighbor's getting it for free. And what's worse, you may not even know that it's going on. In fact, I even found this item right here. This has been around for years. I've been known about this for a long time. But you can even get a booster using this, what we call a cantenna. The original design of this came from a Pringles can, and you could attach this to a network card, aim it in a certain direction where you knew that there would be an access point, and get incredible range out of this thing. In fact, a hackers conference that I sometimes go to, which is DEF CON in Las Vegas, meets every summer. Well, they've had contests to see how far they were able to go to reach a wireless access point, just a conventional access point. They've been able to go over 125 miles away. Now, of course, I've seen the rig that they use to connect to that, and it's a lot more than just this cantenna. It's a truck with a trailer on it and has a gigantic satellite dish on it. But nevertheless, the point there is that wireless signals can be reached over greater distances than you might think, and there are things that people can do to try to extend their reach. Also, here's another one I found. Wi-Fi paint. Can you believe that? This has actually got some kind of metallic aluminum oxide, or I don't remember, something like that in here. And you paint your walls with this, and it will prevent the Wi-Fi signals from leaking out. So I guess if you're really that concerned about your neighbors trying to get your wireless signals, then you could paint your building like this. But you're probably much better off just to use certain security features as opposed to using these extreme measures to get rid of freeloaders. And in certain environments, you may also have problems with radio frequency interference. For example, certain medical devices will generate radio signals, and that could interrupt or damage, or rather jam your Wi-Fi access. You can also have video surveillance, which is also wireless, and it may use a certain frequency that is also very close to your wireless access points. Or microphones. This would be the case, for example, if you have lapel mics. They're the wireless ones that you a lot of times have at conferences and things like this. Those could interfere. And then elevators don't really emit radio frequency interference so much, as it is that they're very fortified concrete, obviously, because they need to be very strong and reliable. And if you've got a wireless access point on one side of the elevator shaft and you're on the other side, you might not be able to get a signal. So that's an interference that you might be aware of. There's also cordless phones. I remember a few years back, my wife would tell me that every time that she would talk on the phone, or not every time, but very frequently, then she would just lose her wireless signal on her laptop. And she just didn't understand why that was. And that didn't happen to me because I work in a different part of the house and I wasn't interfering with the cordless phone. I didn't use it anyway. I hate to be on the phone. So, but she's an interior designer and she's on the phone all day. So I kind of just put it off for a while, and then one day I had to use the house phone, and then it happened to me. And then I realized what was going on. The cordless phone was in the same radio frequency range as our wireless access point. And so since then I've replaced actually both of them, and we're in completely different spectrums now and don't really have an issue with that anymore. Also, security. Well, wireless access points are usually a pretty easy hacker target, especially if they're open access points, which means they have no encryption of any kind, or if they're using weaker encryption, such as wired equivalent privacy, also known as WEP encryption. This is virtually the same as no encryption whatsoever, because it's very easy for hackers to get tools such as WEP crack to be able to derive the proper keys out of existing traffic when they sniff the airwaves, and then they can enter in that same key into their own network card configuration and be able to get on the wireless network. Also, just unsecured access points. Some people just don't know that they should secure their access points, and so it's an open-ended invitation there to any hackers or eavesdroppers. These can be secured. This was initially a big concern in many organizations, and except for places where there's classified information, for example, you probably can get Wi-Fi access even in a lot of corporations right now, because it is possible to secure them a number of different ways. And in fact, a lot of the security measures will probably give you about as good a security as you can get on a wired network. In fact, it's secure enough so that really the issue doesn't really become security, it really becomes access. I mean, if somebody wanted to get on your wired network, they'd have to sneak into the building and plug their laptop into a wall jack somewhere, an RJ45 jack, and hopefully get on somehow or another, or get past your VLANs and all of that kind of stuff. Well, with wireless access points, someone could be out in the parking lot. Some hacker sitting out there in his little Yugo or something like that with his antenna sticking out the window and trying to access your wireless access points. So even though they might be very well secured, the fact that they can at least access them is still a little bit of a scary concern for some folks. Let's take a look also at installing wireless devices and configuring them. When you install a device, obviously Plug and Play is going to look for drivers. Many vendors would recommend that you insert their CD first, install the software that comes with it, because a lot of times these wireless network cards will include some kind of software that allows you to custom configure certain characteristics of it, or they will include some kind of a built-in wizard which will interoperate with Windows wireless networking, and it makes it a little easier for the user. It gives them kind of a next finish wizard or something of this nature. So, depending on the user, you may install the vendor CD first, which would also pre-install all of the drivers for the user. This is a method that I certainly recommend when it comes to multifunction printers and various types of print devices, because there's also accompanying software that allows those devices to reach their full potential. But when it comes to wireless devices, my own preference, you don't have to do this, not an exam issue, my own preference is just to use the built-in drivers that Microsoft provides if they're available. And if they're not, then of course I'll go to the vendor's CD or download the ones from the vendor's website. And the reason why this might be an issue is because I don't actually like all the little software and wizards and all of the things that the vendor usually provides for the end user. As a more educated user that understands wireless networking, I just don't need all of that stuff. But you might get some more options out of those CDs. Also, when you select an access point, one thing you have to consider there is you may not be able to find the access point you're looking for. Someone may have said the name of the access point is Wi-Fi 1, and you look all over the place in the available Wi-Fi and you can't see any. You can see the neighbors, you can see the business next door, and you can see the coffee shop down the street, but you can't seem to see your own AP. Why is that? Well, it could be that the SSID or the service set identifier has been turned off. Normally, they will broadcast a signal so that they make themselves known. That's why when you go to public Wi-Fis, you can easily see them in the airport and in the coffee shop and the like, and then you just connect to them, right? Well, that may not always be the case if they're hidden, and that's a rudimentary security measure, although it's falling out of favor in recent times. And I'll talk more about that later on. There's also the issue of selecting a preferred access point, and this would be the case specifically if you work in maybe an office building where there's multiple access points and many of them are named different things. Well, you may have a preference to connect to one as opposed to another, and if you have multiple wireless access points that your computer has memorized, so to speak, then you can drag and drop them in a certain order to adjust which order you prefer. And whatever's at the top of the list will be preferred, even if someone that's lower down the list has a stronger signal. So here, let's take a look at how you would configure wireless networking on a Windows 7 client. You can see here that I just installed a wireless N USB network adapter, and it's just an off-the-shelf brand that I got from Linksys. Windows 7 already has the drivers for this, so I didn't need to go to the vendor's website or use the CD, which I lost long ago anyway. Now I need to figure out how I'm going to connect to this thing. Now this particular computer is actually a virtual machine, so it's already kind of configured in an Ethernet or a Pseudo Ethernet connection here. But now that I've got that device installed, I need to go ahead and select my wireless access point. Now this is my neighbor's wireless access point. I don't want to connect to that one. So I got to recirculate this and try to get a better signal here so that I can connect to my own wireless access point. I saw it briefly flash up there, and now it's gone. And there it goes. Now it appears, and my neighbor's dropped off, and I don't know who that is. But you see the little exclamation point. This is a good time to point this out. The yellow exclamation point that we see there identifies that this is an unsecured wireless access point. So apparently, one of my neighbors has not been watching my videos and learning that they need to secure their access points. So I should probably find out who that is and go over there and hack into it. Okay. Anyway, this is my access point right here, and I need to go ahead and make this connection. So if it requires a pre-shared key, which is going to be the case here, I'll need to be able to enter that in. But once I select on it, it also gives me the option to connect automatically. And that way, anytime it's in range, it will automatically make that connection. So I'll just go ahead and connect here. And then you can see here that after a few seconds here, it went ahead and made this connection. Now, let me show you if I open the Network and Sharing Center and manage wireless networks, this does now appear here as well. And one thing to note about this is that this is where you can specify whether you want to connect to a more preferred network. So if I right-click on my existing connection and choose Properties, it says Connect to a more preferred network if available. I've only got the one right now anyway, but if I were to travel around a little bit more and connect to other hotel Wi-Fis and stuff like that, then over time it starts to kind of memorize these things, and you may need to go in here and clear out some of the older ones that you'll never use again. You may also need to select this checkbox, and that would be connect to the network even if it is not broadcasting its name, because you can turn off the broadcast in the access point. Now, this is really kind of a quandary, because if you turn it off on the access point, then when the client here tries to connect to that SSID, which would otherwise be invisible, it actually broadcasts out the name of the SSID in its Discover packets. So it's not completely secure either way. It's kind of 6 and 1/2 dozen of the other. You can either turn off the SSID on the access point, or you can clear this on the client. But if you do that, you may not be able to make a connection at all. So it's a little bit of a quandary there, as I mentioned. And then you can also copy the profile, including any security configuration you've made in this, to a USB flash drive, which I also have, and sometimes I'll configure those. That way, for example, when I change the security keys on my own home access point, then I'll take my USB flash drive to everybody else's laptop and desktops. Like my whole family, everybody has a laptop. I guess we're a bunch of geeks around here. And I'll just plug that into their laptop and let a little wizard run, and then it reconfigures all their wireless networking so that it works just fine. So this is where we would also configure that security. And you can see here that we would choose one of these options. I'm going to revisit this here in a little while, so I'll cancel this for the time being. But basically, you see that we now have a connection at least. Now, for the administrator, one of our big responsibilities here is to secure the wireless access points. In fact, when you get a wireless access point, you take it out of the box, you should not ever plug it into your wired network right from the beginning. Normally, you can plug these into like a laptop or something like that, that again is also disconnected from the rest of your network. And then you can use that connection to open a web page to that wireless access point and make its configuration to the point where it's secure. Once it's secure and tested, then you can go ahead and plug it into the rest of your network. But many times people have made the mistake of just plugging it in and taking their time and getting it properly configured. And for the period of time where that's not properly configured, it's going to be an open access point with all default settings. And this is a big issue. So first thing you want to do here is to change the administrator's username and or password. Different vendors do this different ways. Some vendors don't even use a username. All I have to know is a password. But it's to your advantage to change both of them if possible. Because out of the box, they're always the default. A lot of times, for example, it's just the word admin. I think Linksys, in fact, uses admin. So if I'm war driving, which means I'm driving around with my laptop on the passenger seat, I'm trying to search out some wireless access points in my neighborhood or something like that. Not that I confess to have ever done that, but if I'm doing that, then if I see someone that has a Linksys wireless access point and has all the default settings, then I already know what their administrator password is. And I can get in there and I can either vandalize it and set up security on it so that it cuts off all of their connections, or I could just freeload off of it for a while and hang my antenna out the window and just get free internet access for a while. You also want to change the SSID, and the reason for that is because if the hacker will be able to see the SSID, that's when they already know what brand it is and what the default administrator's password is. So change that SSID. Also, some people recommend that you disable the SSID. Oh, I just realized I misspelled disable. It's supposed to have only one S in there. So disable that SSID. Anyway, the reason why you would want to do that in many cases is because then you become invisible to the casual browser for wireless networks. So hopefully they'll find other easier targets than looking for yours. Although Microsoft still does recommend this in many of their books, online in their TechNet documents and so forth, they say that this is really no longer an issue anymore and you can leave it on if you want. You don't have to disable it. And the reason for that is because even if you disable it, it's still very easy to figure out what the SSID is. You see, anybody that's currently connected to these so-called invisible access points will periodically still broadcast out from the client side the name of the SSID. And they do that when they renegotiate connections or when they regenerate encryption keys and things of this nature. So it's still relatively easy to find, even if it's been so-called disabled here. Another thing you could do would be to implement MAC filtering. This can be either a blacklist or a whitelist. So if it's a blacklist, then any MAC addresses you enter into the list will be expressly denied access to the access point. If you do a whitelist, then all the MAC addresses that you enter into a list will be the only ones that can access the access point. And if they're not in the list, then they're denied access. Now, both of these methods here, like I said earlier, are things that Microsoft in various places, in fact including some of their documentation for the 70-680 exam, has recommended these two items right here. In reality, they're not really that secure, so it's not that much worth bothering with it, in my opinion. And Microsoft also backs that up themselves in certain TechNet documents that they have as well, most of their current documentation. So with this, for example, with MAC filtering, why is that really not that big of a deal in terms of security? Well, what happens with this is you can either use a whitelist or a blacklist. If I'm on a whitelist, then any MAC addresses that I enter into the whitelist will be able to connect to the access point. And a MAC, by the way, is a machine address that is unique to each network card. So my network card has to be expressly allowed access. Now, the other way to go would be to go with a blacklist. And that would be the case if, for example, I find out that periodically I've got, eavesdroppers or freeloaders or somebody like that, and I find out what their MAC addresses are, then I can enter those into my blacklist, and from that point forward, they will no longer be able to make a connection to my access point. Now, the reason why MAC filtering is only a very rudimentary security is because hackers are easily able to determine the MAC addresses of any computers that are legitimately connected to your access point. And there's all kinds of sniffers and packet sniffers and things that they can do to get that information. And then what they could do is they could simply enter in your MAC address into their network card, and they do that using a number of utilities such as SMAC, which allows you to fake or spoof your MAC address and to substitute a different MAC address for it. For example, one of those that's in the whitelist. Now, there are a number of different security protocols that you can implement here as well. One of those is wired equivalent privacy. This is probably the weakest of all of them because you can use a lot of different tools that are publicly available on the internet, such as WEPCrack, and that will quickly, I mean within moments, be able to decipher what the key is that's used to connect to the access point that uses WEP. So very strongly discourage this. In fact, if you have an access point that's kind of old and that's all it supports, it's well worth your while to go down to the store and shell out $30, $40 or whatever to get a new one. Just replace the access point. For Wi-Fi protected access, this is another thing that you could use. And then there's also Wi-Fi protected access too. Wi-Fi protected access uses TKIP. Wi-Fi protected access 2 also can use TKIP plus. It can also use the Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES, which is usually better than TKIP, which is Temporal Key Integrity Protocol. Now, you don't need to memorize that in particular, but I would just know that if you have a choice, use Wi-Fi Protected Access 2 instead. Both of those come in both Enterprise and Personal editions. The Enterprise editions will use a third part of this called a Radius server. Let's go ahead and take a look at that here in just a moment. But for the time being, let's first of all cover the last item. And that would be 802.1x. This is really not something that's unique to wireless networks. You can use 802.1x to secure wired and wireless networks. It involves security, and it authenticates the computer itself and makes sure that it has an appropriate certificate. If it has a certificate that the rest of the network trusts, typically a Radius server that authenticates the certificate against a CA, and there may be other credentials that are also authenticated, then it will allow you onto the network. Okay, so that's what 802.1x, and it can again be used for wired and wireless networks. So here I've connected to my own wireless access point. Notice that I'm using HTTPS here, which is an option with this particular vendor. That way I know that when I enter in the password to access this, that it's not being sent in clear text over the airwaves and easily intercepted. I changed my default SSID to something else so that at least no casual browser would know what vendor of wireless access point that I'm using. And then on wireless security, I kind of bashed in a few random characters here for the passphrase. That's not the actual one that I use, so don't get excited. But here we have a number of different choices for the security mode. WEP, which is very poor security, Wi-Fi protected access personal, or Wi-Fi protected access to personal. Let's start with WEP. With this one, you'll just enter in a passphrase, and you can generate one of your own if you want to. Actually, you'll just type in something, Sponge Bob rocks, something like that. And then on that passphrase, I'll generate something, and it'll generate several keys here that I can then use. And you can just take your pick of which one you want. On the client side, on the Windows 7 clients, when I'm configuring their wireless settings, I'd have to use one of these as the keys. This is very easy to crack. So don't ever use WEP if you can avoid it. Okay, you're much better off to go to the electronics store and buy a different brand and choose something else. Wi-Fi Protected Access Personal starts off with a passphrase. This again must match both on the wireless access point as well as in the network configuration for my Windows 7 client. Now, this is not the passphrase that they will continuously use. You can see that after 3600 seconds, which you can configure to be a longer or shorter duration, it'll regenerate a different key pair at that duration. And so that's also going to help to contribute towards better security. You can also choose Wi-Fi Protected Access 2. Let me choose that one. Personal, again. And with this one, notice that we will now have a choice of AES or TKIP or AES. Wi-Fi Protected Access actually uses Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, although it doesn't show it to you because there's no choice to change it. But with Wi-Fi Protected Access 2, you can use TKIP or AES. My preference is the Advanced Encryption Standard. It's just much better in terms of the overall cryptography. Again, it will also change its key every so often. Then you can also go to the enterprise editions of either one of these items, and when you do that, notice that it asks for a Radius server and Radius port. What happens with this is, when you use Radius, let me go ahead and show you something over here. Oh, it's trying to get me to enter something in. Let me just get off the screen here. When you work with a Radius server, what happens is here I've got my internet access. This could be either a T1 line in corporations or high-speed connection, whatever, but just the internet. And then that connects to my access point or router. Now, the access point may have Ethernet connections through the port, through these desktop computers, and maybe these laptop computers are communicating wirelessly to the wireless access point portion of this same device. Now, regardless of which method is being used, when one of these laptop computers using wireless connects to my access point, what happens is it'll forward any credentials onto the Radius server down here, which can then be checked against some other kind of an authentication server, such as Active Directory. Okay, so that's overall the rule for how that kind of stuff works here. And so that's why I would have to enter in a Radius server here, and this is the default port, but you can also change anything else you want to there. And then again, of course, you have to enter in a shared key here as well. And that would be something, again, that's regenerated every so often. Wi-Fi Protected Access 2 Enterprise, same idea, still uses a Radius server, but it also gives you the option of an Advanced Encryption Standard if you want to use that. And that's just another way of improving the security by adding in the Radius server and an additional level of authentication. And then over here for the wireless MAC filter, you can enable or disable this, and then you can do either a blacklist, which would be the prevent item, or a whitelist, which would be the permit item. If I do the blacklist, then any MAC addresses that I enter in here will be expressly denied access to this access point. On the other hand, if I use a whitelist, then I would have to manually enter in all the MAC addresses of any of my clients that would try to make connections to this access point. Now, you don't have to go visit each individual machine to figure that out, because when you contact any other computer on the network or any other network device, Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP, will keep an ARP cache, which also records their MAC address. And to use this, you can just go to a command prompt and run ARP-A, and then it will correspond each one of these IP addresses, which is with its corresponding MAC address for the network interface card that's being used. And so now I have, a bunch of MAC addresses. And what I could do is I could copy that, for example, and then I could go in here and then I could just paste it in. Okay, so that's one way that we could use this item. Oh, it actually had dashes in it, so you got to remove the dashes. Depends on the vendor. Some of them will allow you to do that. Some of them you have to remove it. So let's try that. And looks like that one took. And I'm actually going to, again, of course, disable that before I cut myself off from my own network here. That would be embarrassing. Then we can go to the Administration tab. And here's where we would change the default router password from whatever it currently is to something else. And you'll just enter in a good password there. I do recommend that you also use HTTPS if at all possible. Now I wanted to also show you some wireless networking from the command line. This is a PDF available for you on nuggetlab.com, and you can see here that it's named Wireless NetShell Commands. That's because most of the command line stuff that you will be doing is going to be using the NetShell utility. So for example, if from an administrator's command prompt, if I wanted to view the wireless LAN interfaces, especially if you have more than one, then you can do netshell wireless LAN show int. Okay, and so let's just go ahead and go to my own laptop right here. By the way, there's some cool widgets over here that you can download from Microsoft, and these will identify some characteristics of your wireless connection and a wired connection, and it also shows you the bandwidth, for example. So that's I think that's kind of handy. Anyway, maybe I want to know about my interfaces, so I'll do a netshell wireless LAN show int. Okay. Now, you could type interface, but it'll also take the abbreviation. And this tells me that I have a wireless network connection here. And it's showing me the physical address or its MAC address, showing me the SSID that it's connected to, showing me that it's an infrastructure. By the way, that is as opposed to an ad hoc connection. An infrastructure uses an access point. An ad hoc is simply two network devices, like two laptops, where people are making a temporary meeting and want to exchange some files. Well, you can create an ad hoc connection with a temporary password, for example, that allows you to connect to one another. But we strongly recommend against that. Access points are much better and more secure. Anyway, this is the radio type that's currently being used. Now, this is kind of weird and an annoyance for me, but notice that this Wi-Fi network access device allows A, G, and N network access connections. Okay, but I'm forced to use G as opposed to N. I'd rather use N because it's faster, but I'm forced to using G, and you'll see why here in a moment. This also is showing me that I'm using Wi-Fi protected access to personal, and the cipher is CCMP. I don't know why they say CCMP there, but that's the equivalent of AES. Okay, that's the same thing in this interface. And then it shows me the speed that I can use and so forth. Now, if I want more data, then I can do a netshell wireless LAN show, and then this time all, and you can see here that you get quite a bit of verbose information. In fact, I can't even get to the top of the data. I'm cut off from it because the command prompt window doesn't hold it all. So what I did here was, actually, let me do this again, all, and then you can send that out to using the greater than symbol to, C:\/ wireless LAN.txt or something like this. And I'd already done that in advance. So I've got the notepad file here that shows us this. And then once we take a look at this, we see that we get more verbose information. This is where I was showing you earlier that even though the Wi-Fi card is supposed to support N, it doesn't. So when it goes down here more specifically, it says the only radio types supported are A, B, and G. Okay, so this is a useful utility for getting more verbose information like this. Now here I've just gone to a different computer because this is also on a wired connection, and what I'm about to do will disconnect my wireless, and I don't want to do that because then it will close the window and I won't be able to show you anything else anymore since I'm on a remote desktop connection. So what I'm going to do here is to do a net shell, and maybe I want to disconnect. Well, I can do net sh again, wireless LAN, and then I can disconnect, and then interface equals, and if you know the name of the interface or the number of it, you can type that in here, but I don't really remember, and I've only got one anyway, so I'm just going to do asterisk, which will disconnect all of them, and then we'll see here that it will disconnect successfully for that, and you can notice that down in the tray area, the wireless symbol is now gone. And then to reconnect, I did a netshell wireless LAN connect, name equals, and then here, this is the name of the profile that you're using, and then this is the name of the SSID. Normally they're going to be the same by default, because the profile is going to be automatically named the same as the SSID. However, I think I've got a item here. There's my wireless networks in control panel. If you want to rename this, you can do that, and then I would just say, my Wi-Fi. Okay, so now it would have a different network, and that would be a different profile then, and that's the name that I would specify here instead. But otherwise, this is just what you'll enter in to reconnect. And as I've mentioned before, I think one of the reasons why you might want to know some of these command line items is because sometimes Microsoft just kind of likes to use their command line toys. Even though it's easier to use the mouse and the UI, then you may need to know how to do some of these kinds of things. But there's a more practical purpose as well, and that is that you may need to script some of these items from time to time. So for example, maybe you're trying to configure a whole gaggle of new laptops that you just got in. You could put this syntax as necessary into a batch file or some kind of a script and run it on all of the laptops as you prepare them and get them ready for the user. Might make things a little bit easier. Alright, now here I want to make an abrupt transition to a totally different topic, and one of the reasons for that is because it's listed at the end of the networking settings, and it does have something to do with networking, but it has more to do with printing, which is why I'm in the Devices and Printers control panel. Also, it's not a big enough topic to really have its own subject, so I'm just going to tack it on to the end here. This is one of the exam objectives, though, and it says that we need to be able to configure location-aware printing. Fortunately, this is just as easy as can be. If you can install a printer, then you can do location-aware printing. There's not really that much more to it. Now, what we've got going on here, first of all, is let me just go to a command prompt and show you what network I'm on. Okay, I am on the IP config. Let's see. We are on 192, should be 192.168.1.100. That's my current IP address, okay? Now, at work, I'm on a 10.10.10. network. So I'm on a totally different network. And you can see here that in the office, I'm connected to one of these Canon multifunction printers. At home, I just happen to have the same exact printer, okay? And it's just, when I'm at home, though, I don't want to set a print job out and have it go to my work printer. Likewise, when I'm at work, I don't want to send a print job out and have it use my home printer as the default. And normally, that's what would happen. I would have to decide to go back in here every day when I'd come into the office, right-click here, choose Set as Default Printer, and then when I went home at the end of the day, I'd have to right-click here, choose Set as Default Printer. That's a little bit of a hassle. Inevitably, I'll forget, and I'll just send a print job to a kind of a dead queue, actually, because I'm not actually connected to that office printer right now. So then when I would come back into the office, the only good news there is when it reconnects, it should go ahead and spit out that print job, which is waiting offline while the printer was unavailable. But a better solution is to have this automatically switch to the correct printer depending upon where I am, and that's what location-aware printing is all about. And the way this works is if I'm connecting network printers. Now, if it's something like a locally attached printer, like a USB one, that's not related to the network at all, and so that will have no bearing on what I'm about to show you here. But if I connect these printers, which are IP-based printers, this one's on 192.168.1.3, I think it is, and this one's on 10.10.10.3, then once I have two or more network printers connected, there's a new button that appears up here at the top that's called Manage Default Printers. And when I click on this, I can then say, anytime I'm on the unidentified network, I want you to use this printer, the home printer. And then anytime, and I'll update that, and it's actually kind of already filled it in for me there. And then anytime I'm at work at AccuSource.local, my work domain and IP address range, which is in the 10.10. network, I want you to use the office printer. Okay, so what this does is, every time I connect to the network, it's going to identify which IP address range I'm in, and then it's going to give me the appropriate printer, and reset that one as the default. So then, here I'm going to go ahead and switch networks. I've turned on my wireless network card, but I'm no longer really connected to that wireless network, and I thought this would be a good time to also show you how you can use the USB flash drive to configure your network. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and open up Windows Explorer and wait for the USB flash drive to appear. And then here it is. So now I've got my USB flash drive with the wireless network configuration on it. And I'm going to go here to set up SNK, which is the executable if autoplay doesn't run. And I'm going to go ahead and add this work network to it. And again, I'm kind of just killing two birds with one stone because I wanted to show you how you can add this quite easily using that USB flash drive item when you save a configuration to the USB flash drive. But now, notice that I am now connected to my Office and as the default printer. And it did that as soon as I switched networks from my home network to my work network at 10.10.10. Then it set the default to this printer. In this nugget, we took a look at wireless networking. We took a look at some of the wireless advantages, first of all, and obviously it's that it's wireless. I mean, you don't have to get your dog tangled up in cables when you're working with wireless networking. But also, you don't have to tear out walls and run cable runs throughout the building and things of this nature. But it's also got some disadvantages, which we looked at as well, things such as radio frequency interference and obviously security. We took a look at installing wireless devices, such as the network interface card itself, and we looked at also selecting an access point and making the connection to it. We need to also make sure that we properly secure the wireless access points. And on common wireless access points, you're going to usually have, in current ones, Wi-Fi protected access or Wi-Fi protected access 2. If you're using the enterprise version of that, remember, you need to also have a Radius server and a whole infrastructure for that as well. And then we finally concluded here with kind of a different topic, and that was location-aware printing, which allows you to have a default printer in different network locations. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.